Hey guys, and welcome to Shock and Awe Betwixt the Books episode, where Gretchen and I are going to talk about the same book, because that doesn't ever happen, and now it's happening. Yay! The book that we're talking about today, we technically read for book club. We haven't been posting book clubs, and there's reasons for that. We're still working out how we want to, do them feasibly, and working with Taylor and, just figuring out how that is. But we wanted to make a video on this one, so we're just going to do a Betwixt review for the moment. We're talking about Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, which is a science fiction / literary horror, I would say, book about some scientist ladies that are going into a weird place called Area X. It's an ever-growing environmental phenomena that a government group is trying to A, research, and B, learn about, and so they're sending these ladies into it, and we're following one of the scientists as she explores Area X.
So this book is not normally something that I would have picked up on my own, as many of the book club picks that aren't mine normally are, especially when they're Taylor's. Gosh darn it, Taylor. But I'd heard a lot of things about this book, and I knew that it was short. So I was like, well, Taylor wants to read it, but even if it's terrible, it's short and it's fine. I expected something way more traditionally horror than what it was. And Michaela and I will talk a little bit about what I mean by that. But this book was so much better than I thought it was going to be. I believe I gave it about 4 stars on Goodreads, and I stand by that rating. Because even though it was short, it was dense, it was poignant, it was uncanny, and it was just so think-piecey, which was something that I didn't expect. So I really hope Taylor never watches this video because, I actually have to say that I liked one of his books, and that's not normal for me, and I hate it.
I should say that I'm coming from the perspective of this having been my second read of the book. I picked it up for myself 3-4 years ago. I have the other 2 books on my shelves behind me somewhere. But, I read Annihilation a while ago because it is definitely something inside of my wheelhouse. You know that I'm a horror fan, and I tend to gravitate more towards, weird science fiction things. So this was totally my thing. I think when I read it the first time, I read it in one sitting in an afternoon. And I rated it 3 stars on Goodreads. I think that rating was actually 3.5. But you know how Goodreads is. It doesn't let you do half stars. I think upon second reading, and definitely after discussing it with everybody, I am going to agree with Gretchen that it's a 4-star book. There are definitely little things in there that were a bit weird, or I didn't feel like were brought to their full potential. But if what you're looking for is something that's just a weird experience, it's short, it's contained, it has everything in there that you're looking for something that in its own life is perfectly how it should be. It's one complete arc, and it's not too long and not too short. It's just right. This is definitely one of those books for you.
So like Michaela said, there are definitely some things with this book that are a little bit funky, which is different from uncanny. The book is supposed to be uncanny. There are plot points that I don't think were supposed to be funky. But part of what made my reading experience both uncanny and funky was the fact that I listened to this book as an audiobook. If I had had the print copy, for sure, I would have done the same thing as Michaela the first time and read it in one sitting. But the ebook from the audio... however, the ebook from the library, I'm using online resources because of the pandemic, had a huge wait list, but the audiobook was available, so I took the audiobook. As Michaela mentioned, this book follows 4 female scientists as they go into Area X, and the book is narrated as if it was the scientific journal of the biologist on this team, and so she writes this story in a very clinical way. And listening to that through the audiobook was incredibly eerie, and I think it added an element of uncanny, because an audiobook narrator often, it's a monotone, it continues, it's just very, In the beginning of the book, it was so good. It was such a good way to read it, and I think that it gave elements of uncanny to the story that I wouldn't have picked up on if I had read it. One of my issues with that was that when I got to the end and things were kind of speeding up, the audiobook narrator wasn't like speeding up, so I was like, what? The clinical has slightly left the building, but the audio narration is the same. So that was a little bit funky as opposed to uncanny, but I think that I'm really glad that I listened to it as an audiobook, and it's definitely a significantly different experience than reading the book.
I wanted to talk about the movie because a lot of folks, I'm sure, have learned about the book after the movie coming out. Hold on, I have it here for you. The movie, after that came out, it was quite a popular film for people to look at and discuss for a while. It was pretty, I mean, it's got Natalie Portman in it, so you know that, you know, some big name stars are attached to it. This movie is so different from the book. So I had read the book before seeing the movie. I saw the movie, and then now I read the book a second time after seeing the movie. The movie is still one of my favorite, like, science fiction horror movies I've seen to date, I believe. There's a couple of really great scenes in here that I would highly recommend to anybody who likes horror, or specifically body horror or existential horror. Both of those things you can feel in this. And the film does a really great job of pulling in the theme of the book while completely ignoring the plot for the most part. There's bits and pieces of plot that do still show up, but it's like they took the book, chopped out the scenes they liked, and then built an entire another narrative within it. So if you've seen the movie and you're like, oh, I don't really need to read the book, it's so short, like, why would I would still recommend reading the book. It's completely different, or vice versa. If you're okay with horror, I know that Gretchen definitely wouldn't want to watch the movie, and I wouldn't recommend it to her because it's way scarier. Like she was saying, the book is way more of an uncanny thing than like a full-on spooky horror. There are some, like, pretty jarring, scary scenes in this. But I wanted to bring that up for folks because I knew that some folks would be thinking about it. If you want a video where somebody breaks down the themes of the movie, I really like Dan from Foldable Ideas video on this. It's a great way to look at the themes of the movie, which are the exact same themes as the book.
One of the reasons that I most highly recommend this book, for reasons that aren't in the movie, is how much this book makes you think. There are ideas, there are moments about humanity and the way that we react to things, and this book is also, it's not just horror, right? It's environmental horror. So as we think about climate change and the things that we're doing to our planet, and the effect that these kinds of changes have had on humanity, right? Because climate change affects humanity, but humanity affects climate change, and that's not a one-way street. It's a circle. And this book, despite being so short, is so good at intertwining those things and just making it super, super uncanny, spooky. And when you shut this book, you're just still going to be thinking about a lot of the things that it said.
For those of you who play like RPG style video games, when I was reading this book, it felt so much to me like walking around in a walking sim where there were elements of the book, like the map or their exploration, that felt so much like the way that you would play a video game, where there are elements that are pinged on your map that certain people focus on, and there's a type of player who is going to be given these goals and continue towards them, and then some of the folks in the party notice things that aren't necessarily identified on their main map, and they want to explore that element of it. And there's a completely other type of player who's like, that's not on my map, I must go explore everything to the fullest. And this book felt like it was trying to tell a story about how all of these different people's goals and the way that they go about their life is completely different. And that helped build into that creepiness where you're like, why wasn't this extremely important element given to them from the very beginning, that they were meant to explore it, or did nobody know about it, or were they supposed to stay away from it? Was it a way to try and help them avoid something? All of these things are tied up really at the core of like what you're feeling while you're walking around in these folks' heads. Well, technically just one folks' heads, but walking around with them. All of that builds back into the horror of this book, which, yes, is all about change. It's environmental change in the area, change within yourself, change in your perspective, your viewpoint, all of these things culminate into you thinking along with these characters and then coming out of the book and continuing to think about things like perspective and what it is to be human in our society. Like, what are we how do we take in all of this stimuli that we are constantly being bombarded with, a lot of which is very scary, and what do we do with that information when we're given information that we can digest in our particular viewpoint, and how we can deal with it, how all of that affects us. So there's the existentialism, there's the creepiness of everything going on, there's the uncanniness of seeing things that we think are one thing and then suddenly having revelations that they're something else entirely, feeling like people are withholding information. All of this stuff wraps up into a book that, for being, I think, under 200 pages, is pretty darn impressive.
So while we recognize that during the time of coronavirus might not be the time for an existential crisis due to eco-horror, we still have to recommend this book. For Michaela, being someone who this is her wheelhouse, liking it. For me, it not being my wheelhouse and really liking it. That's the best way we here at Betwixt the Books can recommend a book to you. So if you're feeling like this is something that you want to be reading right now, like Michaela said, it's under 200 pages. It works as a print book, an ebook, or an e-audio. Might even be worth it to both listen and read to the book, not at the same time. I don't recommend that. That'd be weird.
Unless you're into that, then do both. Why not?
It is not often that we find books that we similarly really, really recommend. So take that for what you will and either add it to your reading list now or save it until after there's no more pandemic, whenever that may be. Michaela and I are really happy to be back doing reviews for you guys, really happy to be back reading the same books. Even though we are still socially distant, we are still reading together, still loving talking to you guys, and we hope that you will let us know down in the comments if you've read this book, if you listened to the book, watched the movie. If you haven't done any of those things, let us know, chat with us, and we'll be back with some new videos and reviews soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.